May 27th, 1997. A day for many in south-central Texas started off like any other day in late May. The day following the Memorial Day holiday weekend, many people in Texas just finished celebrating the Memorial Day holiday, with many Texans returning to work and continuing their lives as normal. Severe weather was a threat for that day. However, tornadoes were not expected to be the primary threat. As many got to work, those in the Austin metro were expecting some thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening, but nothing too out of the ordinary for May. By the end of the day, the state of Texas would have witnessed history made in front of their very eyes. An outbreak whose story was dominated by a single tornado. A tornado whose track and overall movement was one of a kind. A tornado whose damage was so violent, the damage observed has gone on record as some of the most extreme ever observed from a tornado. While overshadowed by the other major tornadoes that occurred in the late 90s alongside the two super outbreaks that are often brought up, it was a tornado that, despite not being talked about nowadays, left its impact in history on the small community of Jarrell, Texas. More importantly, a tornado that was one of the first to expose the flaws with the Fujita scale and led to the development of the enhanced Fujita scale. 25 years later, the 1997 Jarrell tornado's name lives in infamy as one of the most important singular tornadoes in meteorological history. Today, I will explain the story behind the Jarrell F5 tornado, the history, the impacts, the importance regarding its placement in meteorological history, and its contributions to the development of the enhanced Fujita scale. Welcome to Nature's Fury. The 1997 tornado season before the 27th was relatively quiet. The major notable outbreaks that occurred that year happened on January 24th, where an F4 tornado tore through Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and the outbreak was also notable for an F2 tornado that went through downtown Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The most major outbreak so far occurred on March 1st, where 3 F4 tornadoes were observed, 2 in Arkansas and 1 in Tennessee. For the Plains, a relatively inactive year for tornadoes up until this point. In Texas, where the majority of the northern part of the state is in traditional tornado alley, a nice change of pace regarding the lack of tornadoes from the 1997 season. Just to the south of Tornado Alley lies Austin, Texas, the state capital. Roughly 40 miles to the north-northeast of Austin lies the small community of Jarrell, Texas. The community's population by 1997 was roughly 410, and one of the most common areas where residents lived was the Double Creek Estates Subdivision, which once contained 38 homes made of brick and stone. There is very little history regarding the town of Jarrell itself before what occurred on that fateful day on May 27, 1997, but afterwards, a single tornado would change everything for that small community for the rest of time. Despite the relatively quiet start to the 1997 severe weather season, things were about to change in Texas. A major severe weather outbreak was predicted to occur on May 27, 1997. However, the setup and overall conditions that were in place were conducive for non-tornadic supercells, and yet, tornadic supercells occurred anyway. The environmental conditions makes the meteorological synopsis for the Jarrell outbreak one of the most unique out of any tornado outbreak in meteorological history. Now, there's going to be some meteorological jargon that will be used to explain this whole setup, and I will be simplifying things to make things easy to understand for people who are unfamiliar with the in-depth specifics of meteorology and how severe weather works. However, the setup for the Jarrell tornado is a major factor as to why the tornado itself was so unique, and why it caused the damage it did. One cannot talk about Jarrell without mentioning the setup. The expectations going into the 27th would be that there would be a possibility for severe thunderstorms across the southern United States, specifically in Texas and Louisiana, with the primary threats being large hail, strong winds, but notably, the threat of tornadoes was not as significant as the threats of hail and strong winds. Why was that? Well, the conditions in Texas that day created a setup that did not have all of the ingredients present to favor a large-scale outbreak of tornadoes. Beginning with the low-pressure system that influences how outbreaks occur in the first place. For most tornado outbreaks in this location, the upper-level low-pressure system would be present over portions of Oklahoma. In the case of the Jarrell outbreak, the main influencing upper-level low-pressure system was located across the northern plains, with the upper-level low-pressure system being nearly 1,000 miles away from where the storms were expected to occur. The upper-level low-pressure system would present very little influence on the cells that formed in Texas. To add on to the issue of the low-pressure system being far away from the cells themselves, of the 5 ingredients that create the best suitable environment for tornado development, that being wind shear, helicity, cape, moisture, and lapse rates, there is a significant lack of helicity and wind shear. For the sake of this video, helicity is the term used to describe the ability for a thunderstorm to form a curve and a hook echo, and the hook echo is important for the best possible structure for a strong tornado, and wind shear is the change of wind velocity over a short distance. There was enough vertical wind shear to support the development of supercell thunderstorms. However, combined with the relatively weak winds in the lower levels of the atmosphere, the environment did not seem conducive for tornadic thunderstorms. The helicity was even worse off. A report from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln concluded that the helicity found was more akin to that of non-severe backbuilding storms. Backbuilding storms simply refer to storms that form and move down a frontal boundary. The storm relative helicity from the surface up to 3 kilometers is roughly 60 meters squared per second squared. Typically, that value is anywhere from 150 to 300 in significant tornadoes. When adequate, large amounts of shear keep the storms moving fast, and large amounts of helicity keep tornadoes on the ground for longer. However, in the case of Jarrell, those factors were minimal. The other 3 factors in tornado development that were in the area, CAPE, the mid-level lapse rates, and moisture, were in abundance in the South Texas area. CAPE is a measurement of how unstable the atmosphere is. The higher the CAPE, the more energy available for thunderstorms and the tornadoes to use. CAPE in the area ranged from 5,000 joules per kilogram, peaking near 6,500 joules per kilogram in the mid-afternoon near Calvert, Texas. Keep in mind, CAPE values of 4,000 joules per kilogram is considered extreme for tornadic development according to the Storm Prediction Center. Low-level CAPE, which is now commonly referred to as 3-kilometer CAPE, which is just CAPE measured low in the atmosphere, was even more insane, with areas of 3-kilometer CAPE in the Dallas-Fort Worth area measuring 249 joules per kilogram. Normally, the 3-kilometer CAPE is around 75 to 150 joules per kilogram in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at this time of year. To make things simple, the high values of CAPE in the 3-kilometer CAPE was enough to allow for rapid storm growth. The mid-level lapse rates, another signature of how unstable the atmosphere is by measuring temperature differences between 10 to 20,000 feet in the air, was negative 7.5 degrees Celsius per kilometer. Lapse rates that extreme meant that thunderstorm updrafts, the ability for how well air can move up in the atmosphere, had the capability to accelerate properly. The moisture was abundant as well, with dew points, a measurement of what temperatures required for 100% humidity, being in the low to mid-70s, with a dry line, a boundary between high and low dew points, present across central Texas. The temperatures seen in the area were in the mid to upper 80s. The CAPE alone was so extreme that any tornado that could touch down and take advantage of that CAPE could put down a monster, and with barely enough shear and helicity present to allow for a monster tornado to occur. Going into the 27th, there was a lot of uncertainty about the development of tornadic supercells, but a large amount of confidence in the development of supercells in general. The Storm Prediction Center issued a moderate risk for severe weather across east central Texas and western Louisiana, citing the primary threats being strong straight-line winds and large hail. The 27th came, and the events began to unfold. On the morning of the 27th, a cold front was forcing southwest from a surface low that formed near Fayetteville, Arkansas, and the surface low moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Due to the southwest movement of the low-pressure system, the storms that formed that day moved generally to the southwest. Around noon, the cold front sagged southwest near Waco, Texas, alongside the low-level low-pressure system. 2 remnant outflow boundaries that separate the cooled air from the thunderstorms from the surrounding air, from the storms that occurred the night before were present. These outflow boundaries would be where the storms would begin to form. A gravity wave was also present, providing additional lift for the thunderstorms to take advantage of. At this time, a line of thunderstorms began to form along the cold front, extending to the southwest along I-35. On satellite, the thunderstorms formed what seemed to be like a zipper being undone. The thunderstorms were moving extremely slow, roughly 5 miles per hour to the southwest. Keep in mind that the average movement speed for supercell thunderstorms range from 40 to 50 miles per hour, and the movement speed for isolated cells is roughly 12 miles per hour. At 12:54 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the Storm Prediction Center issued a tornado watch for portions of East Texas and western Louisiana, citing the possibility of isolated tornadoes. However, the tornadoes would be confined to a narrow corridor of the intersections of the boundaries formed within the storm system due to the weak vertical wind shear. The primary threats were that of hail up to 3.5 inches in diameter and damaging wind gusts of up to 80 miles per hour. At 12:50 p.m., the first severe thunderstorm warning was issued for the cell that would eventually produce the Jarrell tornado. And at 1:21 p.m., the storm would produce its first tornado warning, producing its first tornado outside of Lorena, Texas, and dropping multiple other tornadoes as the storm would begin to seemingly create new updrafts quickly. In southwestern McLennan County, an F3 tornado touched down and tossed a car and a pickup truck several hundred feet, and destroyed a residence and farm building while on the ground for 20 minutes. Lon Curtis, alongside a forecaster from the Fort Worth office, were tracking the storm, reporting a tornado forming south of the parent cell. Another significant tornado touched down near Morgan's Point Resort, causing near total destruction to trees near Woodland, Texas. The tornado was on the ground for 20 minutes and only moved about 1.6 miles. Another brief tornado rated F0 touched down near Stillhouse Dam. As the storm moved into Salado, the velocity couplet started to intensify significantly. The thunderstorm dropped 3 brief tornadoes ranging from the northwest of Prairie Dell, Texas, just to the north of Jarrell, Texas, ranging from F0 to F2 strength. Of the latest tornado, Lon Curtis stated, "It looked like it was virtually stationary, although the portion of the vortex which was in ground contact was wandering in a pasture about 3/10 of a mile away from me. Between 3:10 and 3:20 p.m., the cloud-based portion of the vortex began thickening." At 3:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the Storm Prediction Center issued a new tornado watch covering south central Texas, citing isolated tornadoes, hail of up to 4 inches in diameter, and 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. And then, at roughly 3:40 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the Jarrell tornado dropped. After dropping 3 tornadoes from near Prairie Dell, Texas to just to the north of Jarrell, the storm produced a 4th tornado at 3:40 p.m., the infamous Jarrell tornado. After touching back down, the tornado took a southwesternly turn, crossing county roads 308, 305, then 307, stripping approximately 525 feet of asphalt off the roads. Eyewitnesses reported a multi-vortex pattern with several small, rope-like funnels being observed, and within a couple minutes, distinctly changing to form a large, wedged tornado. After crossing the County Road 305 and 307 intersection, destroying a business on the corner, the Jarrell tornado moved into the Double Creek Estates Subdivision to the west of Jarrell proper, growing to its maximum width of 3/4 of a mile wide. People in Jarrell proper rushed back home to the subdivision, thinking it would be the safest place for this event. A smart idea in theory, but in retrospect, ended up costing many of those who fled back home their lives. For the next 2 to 3 minutes, the tornado stalled over the Double Creek Estates Subdivision. 2 to 3 minutes of nature's fury at its most extreme. What could only be described as pure hell on Earth, being inside a tornado with winds exceeding 260 miles per hour, for a span of time that is not seen as very long to most, but for those who were there, those couple of minutes felt like an eternity. The tornado, after stalling over the subdivision, moved into woodland before lifting. Due to the movement of the supercell, the events associated with tornadic supercell thunderstorms happened in the opposite order. First was the tornado, then the brief moment of peace, then the strong winds, heavy rain, and hail came after. After the Jarrell tornado lifted, the thunderstorm continued to produce multiple tornadoes. In the southern portion of Williamson County, an F3 tornado crossed into Travis County. Most notably, a moment of heroism from the manager of the Albertsons grocery store, who was a victim of the 1979 Wichita Falls, Texas tornado. He saw the tornado coming, gathered all the attendants in the middle of the store, and moved those in the store to the meat locker, saving several lives. Severe damage was done to the grocery store, while multiple other structures had relatively minor damage, with the damage ranging from F0 to F2 strength. Later, on the shore of Lake Travis, the thunderstorm produced its final tornado as a discrete supercell. An F4 that destroyed a well-built building, and across the street, a house was destroyed with walls knocked down. Continuing into the Hazy Hills subdivision, numerous houses were destroyed. Several houses did survive, but the damage left the houses uninhabitable. The tornado continued moving to the west-southwest, causing mostly F2 damage before lifting after passing the crest of a small hill. Only 1 person died from this tornado, and 5 others were injured. From this point onward, the dry line and cold front merged together to become a single frontal boundary, forming a squall line that absorbed the discrete supercell that produced most of the tornadoes of that day. The squall line moved through the San Antonio area, pushing southward. A couple weak, short-lived tornadoes spawned across the line, and a wind gust of 122 miles per hour was observed on the west side of San Antonio at the Kelly Air Force Base. Another tornado watch was issued at 8:23 p.m., citing isolated tornadoes, hail of up to 3 inches in diameter, and winds of 80 miles per hour. Flash flooding also became a concern, as the heavy rainfall was frequent along the squall line, 1 dying due to the flash flooding near a creek in Austin, Texas. Strong winds and large hail were present. Strong winds ranging from 58 to nearly 80 miles per hour were observed in south central Texas. The largest hail was reported to be nearly 4 inches in diameter inside Cedar Park. Numerous reports of damaging winds and hail were reported in Texas alongside most of the southeastern United States. But, as the storms moved out, the recovery effort began almost immediately. While most of the tornadoes were relatively weak and thus for most locations the damage was minimal, the worst of the damage was relegated to a single, small subdivision outside of Jarrell, Texas. A subdivision that just got swept off the face of the earth.
I think altogether it lasted about 10 minutes, but it seemed like it was forever. There wasn't a ceiling in the next room, and I'm looking and I'm pushing myself back down, and she's sitting there going, "What are you doing?" I said, "There's nothing out there."
tornadoes that rake central Texas. Although twisters as large as this are very rare in the Lone Star State, tornadoes themselves are not. Texas averages more than 100 tornadoes every year. That's more than twice as many as any other state. Of course, tornado tracking is now a major science, but even with advanced warnings, why were so many in Jarrell, Texas killed in this storm?
Shortly after the tornado moved through the subdivision, the residents who survived, the townspeople of Jarrell, and the first responders came to find nothing. Every house in the subdivision, all 38 of them, completely obliterated. At least 12 vehicles, completely demolished. Any and all large debris that would normally be present with the aftermath of a violent tornado was absent. All that was left was small bits and pieces of debris, with the concrete slabs being the only reminder of what was once there. As first responders came, the sheer scope of the loss of life and damage was seen firsthand. 27 people died in the Jarrell tornado, all of them in the subdivision. Many of those families took the right actions in order to minimize loss of life, but many of them died anyway. Most of those who fled back to their homes from work to stay with their families also ended up perishing. The Egos, who were at school, decided it would be better to take shelter at their home. All members of the Ego family lost their lives that day. The Ruiz brothers heard the tornado was coming and made the decision to search for more sturdy shelter than their trailer, going to the Mooring family house, where the brothers and the Mooring family perished. Their trailer, on the other hand, was unscathed by the tornado. Identifying the bodies was a challenge in its own right. Body parts torn so violently that coroner's investigators were having difficulty identifying all the victims. Many of the first responders were traumatized by the event itself, such as Mark McAdams, unable to explain the true ferocity of the situation.
Is it hard for you to talk about what you saw?
Yeah, I'd just rather not talk about that.
Images of body parts sporadically tossed apart. Images of a dead mother holding onto her child as tightly as possible, slammed into debris. The lack of large debris and the sheer violence observed from the damage done to human life and the confusion identifying bodies has garnered the Jarrell 1997 tornado reputation for some of the most extreme damage ever observed in the aftermath of a tornado. To add on to the tragedy, an ominous image seen before the tornado hit the subdivision, representing a dead man walking, an Indian myth of two tornadoes forming what seems to be a man walking. The myth stating that those who come across it will die. An ominous myth that has been heavily associated with the Jarrell tornado. Of those who survived, they don't even know how they survived the disaster in the first place. The governor of Texas, George W. Bush, toured the area a couple days after, stating to the press,
"The devastation was mind-boggling. It's hard to believe that you're looking at a patch of earth where literally the life was sucked out of it."
Bush declared a disaster declaration for Jarrell, asking for federal help from FEMA, a request that was ultimately denied due to the state of Texas already having the funds to support the area. The National Weather Service, alongside members of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, including a young Dr. Lung Phan, conducted damage surveys. The tornado got an F5 rating with no hesitation, with many National Weather Service members still vividly remembering the damage seen in Jarrell to this day. Since then, the town of Jarrell has rebuilt, and now there are multiple storm shelters in place in order to prevent a situation, like what happened 25 years ago, from happening again. Visible scars still left on the earth in the neighborhood, and emotional scars surround and are present with many of the people who remember what happened. The town of Jarrell has grown larger since then, trying to forget what occurred and move on. But the toll the tornado has had on the town is one that nobody living in Jarrell could ever forget. Looking back 25 years later, the 1997 Jarrell tornado isn't as well known or is talked about as much as the Moore 99 tornado or the super outbreaks that are often mentioned today. But the Jarrell 1997 tornado still remains as one of the most important tornadoes in meteorological history, and a tornado that for the residents of Jarrell can never be forgotten. This is where most stories surrounding the Jarrell tornado end, and originally, this is where it would have ended if it weren't for something I found by complete accident. A side of the story of Jarrell that is not mentioned nor has been mentioned to the broader public to my knowledge. A story that makes the Jarrell tornado many more times important to the history of studying tornadoes and in meteorological history in general. Story that comes from the only researcher who I called by name who conducted damage surveys, Dr. Phan, who conducted research that would culminate in a report that would change the way we observe and document damages from tornadoes for the rest of time. Firstly, some background on Dr. Phan. Dr. Phan is an engineer and leader of the Structures Group in the Materials and Structural Systems Division at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Dr. Phan specializes in analyzing performances of structures and materials subject to extreme loadings and field investigations of damage to the built environment caused by natural or man-made disasters. Before Jarrell, he conducted investigations into earthquakes, specifically the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake and the 1994 North Ridge earthquake. The Jarrell tornado was his first tornado damage investigation, and since then, he has conducted investigations into damages to structures from weather-related disasters, such as the Moore 1999 tornado, the 2011 Joplin tornado, and Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Irma, and Michael, just to name a few. But why is he important to the story of Jarrell? Well, in April 1998, he released a report titled The Fujita Tornado Intensity Scale, a critique based on observations of the Jarrell tornado of May 27, 1997. A report that would go to shape the future of analyzing and interpreting wind speeds from damage observed from a tornado. Dr. Phan's report would become the basis for the creation of the Enhanced Fujita Scale, and how the scale works, and one of the first major reports from a government agency to publicly list the flaws with the Fujita Scale by applying structural engineering considerations instead of the damage descriptions from the Fujita Scale. The report is roughly 20 pages long, and I'm surprised that this report isn't often mentioned considering how important this is to the Enhanced Fujita Scale's development. So, in preparation for talking about the paper, I went out of my way to get an interview scheduled with Dr. Phan myself. And after a month of talking, we were finally able to speak to each other, and I asked about his findings and what he observed from the damage in Jarrell that day. First of all, thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy and all that, especially with all this going on, but it's been 25 years since Jarrell, and I felt like it would be appropriate to talk to someone who was there, and so I have my list of questions on my other monitor, and so if you don't have any objections, I can go ahead and get this started. So, could you describe in detail the damage that you saw in the Double Creek Estates Division specifically? Mainly because, and this kind of goes into the question afterward, is that it's considered to be some of the most violent damage that we've seen from a tornado. Pointing to reports from coroners saying they had trouble identifying bodies due to pieces of bodies just being thrown all around, and the complete and total lack of small debris in the areas that were affected. So, what exactly did you see on the ground and in the air?
Yeah, so it's been 25 years now, so it's not easy to describe the damage in detail. But I remember the Double Creek Estate Subdivision is where the tornado damage path width got widened to its maximum width, right, about 3/4 of a mile. This is also where most of the fatalities occur in this subdivision. What I remember, the structure there consisted mainly of single-family wood frame construction, about 15 years old, so it's not old construction. Of typical slab on grade construction type, wood frame on top of a concrete slab. There were no basement or above ground or underground shelter that we could see there because of the geology of the area. It was very visible from the air that most of the houses in this subdivision had been swept clean from the foundation. It's very striking. You could see slab after slab after slab from about 100, 200 meter helicopter hovering above the subdivision. We could see that everything wiped clean off of the foundation. So those are what I remember. The reason what we saw in Jarrell and conclude that is doesn't need to take an F5 to call this kind of damage that we observed. Because what you pointed out, the connection between the sill plate from the between the upper structure and the foundation was not by anchor bolt. it was pneumatically driven nails, right?
That issue with the sill plates goes further into the construction of the houses, which I will briefly go over, as well as the report in general. Basically, the report here argues that the minimum winds needed to do the level of damage that we saw in Jarrell was equivalent to that of an F3 tornado at least. The report comes to this conclusion by using structural engineering considerations and the overall building quality of the structures in the estate's neighborhood to determine what wind speeds were necessary in order to completely level the houses off their foundations. Anything that was equivalent to that, of at least F3 winds or higher, could produce the damage seen in Jarrell. The other reason behind why the winds could be that low was that the tornado itself was stationary for so long, which Dr. Phan took into consideration when writing his report. Going over the specific notes listed in the report, the connections between the sill plates and the foundations were not as strong as those between the sill plates and the wood frames. The sill plates had been connected to the foundations by nails, not anchor bolts, and there was no evidence of anchor bolts or steel straps used at the few random inspections that were conducted. The issues of anchor bolts, Dr. Phan clarified in his interview, stating that all houses had no evidence of anchor bolts. These inspections found that the building codes at the time were not being followed. So when I asked about how significant things would change if the building codes were put in place alongside the rating of the tornado, he told me the problems with the Fujita scale, how much of an impact the building codes would have to the damage seen in Jarrell, and the further implications if things were not changed and tornadoes kept getting misrated.
Yes, it's likely. To answer your last question, the problem is this: it was rated an F5 based on the observed damage in accordance with the F scale at the time by the National Weather Service, and we and the National Weather Service don't see things differently at all. Their job is they're tasked with rating tornado. So they have the tool they use is the Fujita scale, and based on the damage classification, the dispersion of damage that they have, it clearly to them an F5. And it's not their opinion. They are doing their job using the tool that's available to them. The problem with that is the tool is flawed. So that we point out, if you look at this damage description, we cannot tell the difference in terms of wind speed based on the quality of the construction. You might come up with an overclassification. An overclassification of tornado corrupt the tornado database, which eventually lead to the design criteria that is so substantially higher than actuality, that caused everyone to throw their hand up and say, we cannot design for tornado, it's too strong. And that would become an excuse for builder, designer, constructor to continue to build weak structure that keep getting damaged due to wind speed that we think could be designed for. The reason what we saw in Jarrell and conclude that is doesn't need to take an F5 to call this kind of damage that we observed.
When I asked him about whether or not the issues were widely known at this point before Jarrell, Dr. Phan said that the issues with the Fujita scale were not widely addressed before this point.
No, actually, Jarrell was the first event that that brought that situation up. That observation of the scale might be flawed in terms of relating the damage observed with the possible wind speed range that could cause the damage. So no, there were no indication before Jarrell, Texas tornado that we could notice. So there was no attention to that scale prior to Jarrell.
While Dr. Phan's report was not the first report to address the issues with the Fujita scale, the reports released before Dr. Phan's paper did not have as much influence as Dr. Phan's report, because the other reports did not address the issues well enough or did not propose well thought out solutions to the problem. A paper written by Joseph Miner, James McDonald, and Kishore Mehta from 1977 points out some issues with the Fujita scale. However, the nearly 200-page report does not seem to address how to fix the issues stated with the Fujita scale proper, Nor does the report explicitly recommend a revisement of the Fujita scale proper. It wasn't like Dr. Fujita himself was unaware about this either, but his message was not widely received as well as Dr. Phan's. In his memoir, Dr. Fujita proposed a modification that would recognize the difference in the quality of structure. However, this suggestion was not enough to fix the issue. Further looking into Dr. Phan's report and reading the report a bunch of times over, the way the report was laid out and the way the research was conducted is very similar to how the current enhanced Fujita scale assesses damage. Dr. Phan said that his report was the first to conduct research and come up with a report on a tornado that resembles the current system we have today, and that numerous reports afterwards would continue to push for something like the enhanced Fujita scale.
It definitely provided the impetus and galvanized the wind engineering community to move forward with the revision and development of the EF scale for sure. And the fact that it's cited in these very influential paper that you mentioned by the Weather Service and by, I think the other one is Texas Tech University, meant that it really provide maybe the first justification for moving forward with revising the scale. So I'm very glad that happened.
Dr. Phan would continue to be involved in the development of the enhanced Fujita scale, stating,
yeah, so I was part of the NIST team that articulated the problem, publicizing it, formulated the need for an improved tornado rating scale, and actually worked within NIST to provide funding for NIST grantee. In this case, Texas Tech University. Their involvement was coming from our funding at the time. To work on this specific problem of developing the improved scale for in collaboration with the National Weather Service. I was also serving on the committee that Texas Tech University put together that include people, wind engineer from Texas Tech University, meteorologist from National Weather Service, structural engineer, wind engineer from NIST. So this committee come together under this grant that NIST gave to Texas Tech University to develop the EF scale. So that's my involvement.
Now, some people who are watching this who are tornado historians may believe that I'm overhyping the importance of this report. There already were a couple reports that stated that the Fujita scale's wind speed estimates were too high and that the flaws of the scale were already known about before Jarrell. While those points are valid, Dr. Phan's report was one of the first, if not the first major report that used an F5 tornado that left an entire neighborhood with nothing but slab foundations left to expose the flaws of the Fujita scale. He then brought it forward to the attention of the larger scientific community, and his report was the first major report that explained what had to be done in order to improve the Fujita scale. When looking at the article on the enhanced Fujita scale on the SPC's website, they cite Jarrell and More 99 as to why the enhanced Fujita scale began development, or at least tornadoes that exposed the flaws of the Fujita scale. While this story regarding the background of the enhanced Fujita scale on the 1997 Jarrell tornado is not often brought up today, this report is what makes Jarrell one of the most important tornadoes in meteorological history. Dr. Phan's report laid the groundwork for what would become the enhanced Fujita scale, a scale that we now use for every tornado here in the United States. With Dr. Phan's report being the first report to advocate for a revision to the Fujita scale, its importance to the meteorological community is massive. The enhanced Fujita scale isn't perfect, far from it, but it is a system that is in place today, and the importance of Dr. Phan's research is something that cannot be stated enough. 25 years ago, the world saw what was one of the most unusual and violent tornadoes occur in an environment and setup that was not believed to be conducive for violent tornado development. For those in the small community of Jarrell, Texas, the 1997 tornado was an event that they will never forget for the rest of their lives. Many people passed away that day, even those who followed proper safety protocols during a tornado. Jarrell is one of the few tornadoes where the saying that loss of life was likely if people weren't either underground or in a shelter was sadly true and not hyperbolic in the slightest. The damage seen was some of the most extreme ever observed from a singular tornado, and the remnants of human bodies being split and scattered is an image that nobody in the area could ever forget, even if they tried. Jarrell's legacy lives on through both the damage that it caused, and also through Dr. Phan's report. Dr. Phan's report was a cornerstone report that exposed the flaws of the Fujita scale and led to the development of the system we use every day to rate and assess tornado damage. While reports were available already that suggested the flaws of the Fujita scale before Dr. Phan's report, the methods used to expose the flaws with the Fujita scale were not the same as Dr. Phan's, and did not explicitly advocate for the revision of the Fujita scale entirely. His report was important to meteorological history by laying out the groundwork for what would eventually become the enhanced Fujita scale, something that cannot be said enough. It is a story that many people seem to not know about when talking about Jarrell. A quarter of a century later, the people of Jarrell will remember the horrors that occurred 25 years ago, and now, the town has multiple storm shelters in the town to make sure that the past doesn't repeat itself. The people who lost their lives will not be forgotten, not by the people of Jarrell, nor by the people who have researched the storm. The Jarrell tornado may not be talked about as often as it should be, but the tornado will live on as one of the most important tornadoes in history, and the utter power seen when a tornado stalls over a residential area. Wait, don't go yet. I got some stuff I need to talk about that's quite important. There's some things I need to say that I will go over while I let all my sources list out on the screen. First of all, I want to give a massive thank you to Dr. Long Phan, Emil Simu, and the Public Affairs Office at NIST. They were all very nice and cooperative with what was going on in my life, and I could not have done this documentary or this subject justice without interviewing Dr. Phan. I seriously cannot believe that he agreed to an interview, and I am still really excited about how well it turned out. I also want to say thank you for the compliments towards me and how much time I've poured into this project, to a point of where Dr. Phan had to reread his report that came out 24 years ago because of how much detail I went into with my questions, which just blows my mind. For those who want to see the full uncut interview with myself and Dr. Phan, that will be in a link in the description on my second channel. I also tried to get in contact with the SBC and Tim Coleman, courtesy of Dr. John Knox from UGA, who forwarded me to him, but I did not receive a response from Tim nor the SBC, though the SBC was because I had to go through their public affairs office, and we all know how long that takes. Okay, so, funnily enough, after I was midway through editing this entire video, and after I got done fully editing the synopsis, I got a response from Tim Coleman giving me some email addresses to people who work at the SBC. Due to the fact that I don't want this out in mid-June, I didn't contact the SPC, so I guess, but thank you, Tim Coleman, for actually responding to my email. I wasn't expecting that to happen. Special thanks to Thomas Schwent, Diego, and Devin Williams, who proofread the script alongside my usual proofreaders, who typically read it through and change any grammatical errors found in my scripts. Thomas, Diego, and Devin were the ones who specifically made sure I didn't get anything too wrong with the synopsis and actual timeline of events, since they know a lot more about severe weather than I do. Thank you for not making me sound like an idiot. To those who want to see more stuff from me, whether it be weather documentaries or some stupid retrospective or reviews on stuff I like, it would help a lot if you subscribed to the channel, gave the video a like, commented your thoughts, and shared it around. There really hasn't been a good documentary on Jarrell on YouTube that wasn't a made-for-TV special, and I felt like I did the topic justice. At least I hope I did. I have gotten a lot of requests to do another weather documentary since the April 2011 Super Outbreak documentary from last year, and I hope this was worth the wait. I do have more videos I'm working on in the background, but not all of them are related to weather. On the note of supporting me, if you also want to waste money on me and support me at the same time, I have also opened up a Patreon for my videos. At the time of recording this, I have not finalized pricings, but the highest tier will be able to request documentary subjects and video subjects to me to cover as long as I'm not putting myself in pain. But you'll still get your usual having your name at the end or having a shout out on the channel or something like that, as you see in most Patreons. Otherwise, I have nothing else to say. I'm Alferia, and next time I will cover a much less serious topic, as in, I have an entire retrospective on Bejeweled planned in the next week or so. Yet again, thank you, Audacity, for not working with me. Yeah, Bejeweled retrospective sometime in the next couple of weeks. Otherwise, I am Alferia. You all have a good night, and I will talk to you soon. Hopefully you all enjoyed.